They say Portland never really sleeps. Even in the early hours of a Monday morning, the city hums. Quiet coffee shops start pulling espresso shots, runners stretch under streetlights, and buses groan their way through sleepy neighborhoods. But on July 7, 2008, just as the first morning light brushed over northeast Portland, a young Canadian woman's life ended violently, her blood smeared across a stairwell that was supposed to lead her home. Her name was Rachel McAdams, 22 years old, a fashion model from British Columbia, Canada. Blonde, tall, graceful, the kind of presence that made people turn their heads without quite knowing why. She'd only been in Portland for 12 days. She came with dreams of glamour and runway lights. Instead, her body would be found crumpled in a narrow stairwell of a decaying apartment complex, with 22 stab wounds and no immediate suspect in sight. It all started, like many tragedies do, with something painfully ordinary. That Monday morning, around 6 a.m., Rachel's roommate, Emily Carter, was returning home from a movie night at a friend's house. The streets were already busy. Portlanders in suits, students in backpacks, delivery trucks making their early rounds. Nobody noticed the girl with messy blonde hair, wrinkled jeans, and dark circles under her eyes. Emily was too tired to care. All she wanted was a shower, a nap, and maybe a text from Rachel saying she'd already made coffee. Their apartment building on Alameda Street was nothing special. 6 floors of aging brick and rusted iron fences. No doorman. No cameras in the stairwell. Just a faded nameplate at the front. Alameda Gardens, 1974. A relic, surrounded by construction cranes and gentrifying cafes. But to Rachel and Emily, apartment 6B was a place to crash between gigs, with cheap rent and a view of downtown Portland if you squinted through the blinds. Emily usually took the elevator, but that morning, for reasons she couldn't explain, she decided to walk. Maybe she thought the steps would wake her up. Maybe it was habit. But as she climbed past the 4th floor, something changed. The hallway lights were dim, one bulb was flickering, casting shadows that pulsed like a heartbeat. Halfway up the stairwell between the 5th and 6th floors, she saw something that made her stop. A body. Face down. Long hair spilling out across the dirty concrete steps. A woman. Not moving. Not breathing. Blood, dark, thick, dried into the cement, splattered on the walls, pooled beneath her torso, trailing down the steps like a slow, quiet scream. Emily froze. Her first thought wasn't even murder. It was, is that Rachel? She couldn't tell. The face was hidden. The limbs twisted unnaturally. Her brain refused to make the connection. She turned and ran, legs wobbling, heart thudding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Down the stairs. Past the broken mailboxes. Into the security office on the ground floor, empty, as always. She banged on the door anyway. A middle-aged man in a janitor's uniform finally emerged, half awake, confused. Emily tried to explain in broken bursts of English and hand gestures. Upstairs. Blood. Woman. Dead. The man blinked at her like she was speaking a different language. Maybe she was. Panic rising, she gave up and ran to the elevator, hitting the button over and over like it would change something. She needed to see if Rachel was home. The elevator reached the 6th floor. The doors slid open. What Emily saw next made her legs buckle. A trail of blood, starting at their apartment door, 6B, and leading toward the stairwell where the body was. The floor was smeared with dried crimson, coagulated and dark. The concrete seemed to drink it in. She didn't need to knock. She already knew. Rachel wasn't answering because Rachel couldn't answer. She called her friend, Ben Zhao, a Chinese-American college student who lived a few blocks away. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "There's someone dead in the building. I think it's Rachel." Ben came running. The police weren't far behind. What they found confirmed Emily's worst fears. The victim was indeed Rachel McAdams. She had been stabbed 22 times. Most wounds were shallow, defensive, slashing across arms, shoulders, hands. But 3 went deep. One to the chest, another to the liver, the last to the heart. Fatal. The forensic report would later estimate that she died between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., somewhere in the hours while the city slept, and no one was listening. Rachel's body had been dragged. The attack had started in the apartment, moved through the hallway, and ended in the stairwell. There were signs of a struggle: blood on the couch cushions, overturned furniture, bloody fingerprints on the bedroom doorknob. Her phone was found under the bed, screen cracked, battery drained. There were no signs of sexual assault. But her wallet was missing, and so was her laptop, camera, and a silver necklace she always wore. It looked like a robbery gone wrong. But why so brutal? Why 22 stab wounds? The building had no security footage in the stairwell. No fingerprints were found on the door handle. No witnesses. It was in every sense a ghost crime. And yet, behind all the silence, a single clue would soon emerge, one that led to a grainy surveillance video, a suspicious young man in black, and a phone call made from a booth at 11:55 p.m. But that, as they say, is for another part of the story. Rachel McAdams wasn't supposed to die in Portland. She was supposed to fly home. In 2 weeks. That was the plan. Return to Canada, back to the Gulf Islands where her sisters were waiting, where the smell of cedar trees filled the air, and where doors didn't need to be locked at night. But Portland had other plans. Rachel came here chasing what so many young women dream of: a career that would take her places, a way out of small-town anonymity, maybe even a little stardom. She had the looks, blonde hair, natural smile, and the kind of quiet poise that made her stand out without trying. At 5 feet 9 inches, she moved like someone born to wear runway heels. Her journey began in British Columbia. A small town girl who, after her parents divorced, had moved with her mother and sisters to Salt Spring Island, peaceful, remote, the kind of place where neighbors leave pies on your doorstep and keys in your ignition. She modeled part-time during high school, signed her first agency contract at 18, and by 20 had landed a 3-month gig in Milan. Fashion shoots, art directors, glamorous chaos. It was intoxicating. But when she returned home, the offers dried up. Weeks turned into months. Rachel began to wonder if Milan had been the peak. Until, in early 2008, she received an offer from a modeling agency based in Victoria, Emerald Models. They were launching a new partnership in the US, a boutique agency in Portland, Oregon, claiming to have ties with big names like Elle, Harper's Bazaar, and even Vogue. What sealed the deal for Rachel was the mention of another Canadian model, Emily Carter, already working in Portland and reportedly doing well. "She's even been on a cover," the agent told her over the phone. "You two would get along great." It felt safe. Familiar. Another Canadian, same agency, same path. Rachel signed the 3-month contract. But there was a catch. The agency didn't offer work visas. Just a 30-day tourist visa, with a vague promise that someone from the Portland office would figure it out once she arrived. The contract terms weren't great either. 10% went to Emerald Models, another 25% to the Portland branch, and she was expected to pay housing costs up front. Still, Rachel said yes. She arrived in Portland on June 24th and moved into a shared apartment with Emily in the Alameda Gardens building. Unit 6B. A faded 3-bedroom with weak water pressure, peeling wallpaper, and rent that didn't match the condition. But there was space, light in the mornings, and a kind of gritty charm that made it feel like the start of something. Only it wasn't. Her first assignment wasn't a photo shoot, but a whiskey promotion at a downtown bar. Then came a nightclub opening. Then another. She stood for hours in high heels, handing out flyers, trying to smile while men twice her age stared too long. The next gig was a corporate dinner. Then a casino event. Rachel kept asking when the magazine shoot would happen. They kept saying, soon. Within a week, her optimism cracked. She called her boyfriend back in Canada. Told him this wasn't what she signed up for. That it all felt off. That the apartment was falling apart, the job's humiliating, and the agency strangely unresponsive. "I think they lied to me," she whispered in one call. "I want out." But getting out wasn't easy. The contract had hefty penalty clauses, and she didn't want to drag her family into legal trouble. So she found a loophole. Her tourist visa would expire on July 24th. She decided to use that as her escape route, quietly book a return flight home and walk away without a fight. She didn't even tell the agency. Only a few close friends knew. It was her quiet rebellion. Her plan for freedom. She booked the flight on July 3rd, exactly 9 days after arriving. She never made it to the 24th. What nobody knew, what Rachel herself couldn't have predicted, was that in the final days before her death, something was shifting. She started sleeping with her bedroom door open, a habit from home. She would leave the apartment door slightly ajar, especially after stepping out for groceries or fresh air. It wasn't carelessness. It was naivety, born from years of living where people trusted each other. Emily warned her. "I told her so many times," she later said to police. "I'd come home and the door would be open, not wide, just cracked. She'd say, 'Oh, I forgot,' and I'd roll my eyes and lock it." It became a joke between them. Emily, the city slicker. Rachel, the island girl who didn't believe in locks. That unlocked door would become the critical detail in the investigation. Because there were no signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No tampered locks. Whoever entered the apartment that night walked in freely. Rachel's final day followed a quiet, almost mundane pattern. On Sunday afternoon, July 6th, she worked a daytime promo gig in Eugene, then flew back to Portland in the evening. She and Emily had dinner at a Mediterranean place down the street. They shared hummus, falafel, and talked about Rachel's upcoming return flight. 2 more weeks, she'd smiled. Then I'm done. After dinner, Emily went to a friend's house to watch movies. Rachel declined. Said she was tired. Said she just wanted to shower and sleep. She was seen on security footage returning to the apartment at 10:50 p.m., carrying a small grocery bag. Based on receipts and items found in the fridge, she'd stopped at a local 24-hour market on the corner of Fremont and 15th. That was the last time she was seen alive. Around 11:30 p.m., neighbors reported hearing a scream, short, high-pitched, followed by muffled thuds. Then silence. No one called the police. Most thought it was an argument. Maybe a couple fighting. Maybe someone watching a horror movie with the volume too high. The screams lasted about a minute. Then nothing. By the time Emily returned the next morning, Rachel had been dead for hours. She had trusted the wrong city, the wrong agency, the wrong assumptions, and maybe, just maybe, the wrong instinct to leave her door open to a stranger. But what Rachel didn't know, and what the police were about to uncover, was that someone had been watching, someone who knew she lived there, and someone who had already been inside once before. The horror didn't start in the stairwell. It started in the living room. At least, that's what the blood said. When forensic investigators entered apartment 6B, they were met with a grim map, splashes, smears, and footprints that told the story Rachel couldn't. The scene was brutal, but it was also deliberate. Someone had been inside, not just for the killing but for what came after. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No damaged window frames. Whoever entered that apartment had done so quietly, perhaps gently pushing open an unlocked door. A door Rachel might have left slightly ajar, just like she had many times before. That single detail, the unlocked door, wasn't just tragic. It was the key. From the pattern of blood stains, police reconstructed the attack. The first drops appeared near the couch. On it sat a white MacBook Pro, open, screen cracked. Beside it, a half-eaten granola bar. Rachel had likely come home, dropped her groceries, opened her laptop, and settled in, maybe to write an email, maybe to call someone. The ambient peace of routine. That peace shattered when a man stepped into the apartment. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. Maybe Rachel thought it was a neighbor. Maybe she assumed he was from the agency. Maybe she froze. What's known is that the confrontation turned violent almost immediately. The intruder pulled a knife, sharp, single-edged, possibly a kitchen blade from the drawer. And then, in an instant, Rachel was no longer a woman winding down for bed. She was fighting for her life. The blood stains told of a desperate struggle. There were smears across the floor from where she ran. Fingerprints on the bedroom door, where she tried to close it against him. But he forced it open. Inside, the bed was covered in thin sprays of arterial blood, the pillows torn apart, one of them soaked dark red at the edges. Rachel had tried to defend herself. Her arms bore multiple shallow slashes, defensive wounds from someone shielding their chest with bare hands. The killer was slashing wildly, maybe panicked, maybe enraged. Somehow, she broke free. The trail of footprints suggested she sprinted from the bedroom, past the open fridge, and toward the hallway. She didn't scream once in the apartment, but the neighbors heard her in the stairwell. Around 11:30 p.m., residents on the 5th and 6th floors reported hearing muffled screaming. One tenant described it as a high-pitched yell, maybe a woman fighting with someone, or just yelling at the TV. Another remembered a loud thud, like someone fell hard. But no one opened their doors. No one called for help. That decision would haunt them later. Rachel's body was found face down halfway between the 5th and 6th floors. The final pool of blood was thick, dark, and sticky with hours of decay. Blood trails showed that even as she collapsed, she had tried to crawl forward, leaving smeared handprints on the concrete steps, each weaker than the last. She died alone, within reach of someone else's door. And yet, for all the brutality, something about the killer's behavior didn't fit. He hadn't just killed her. He had stayed. He had cleaned his hands. Smudges of blood were found on the apartment's bathroom sink. He had moved items around. Rachel's purse was unzipped, wallet gone. Drawers were pulled open, her suitcase rifled through. The killer wasn't just escaping. He was looking for something. And then, for reasons no one yet understood, he left without taking anything visible. The laptop remained. So did the camera. Jewelry on the nightstand was untouched. It didn't look like a robbery. It looked like chaos. Impulsive. Reactionary. But that wouldn't last. Because hours later he came back. At 3:57 a.m., a figure appeared again on the building's exterior security camera, the only camera that captured the front entrance. The same one that recorded Rachel returning at 10:50 p.m. Now, it showed a man in black, riding a bicycle slowly around the building. Face partly obscured by a hood. His behavior was odd. He circled the property twice, each time slowing near the stairwell window. He looked up, waited, then kept pedaling. At 4:06 a.m., he chained his bike to the fence and entered through the front door. This time he carried a backpack. He stayed inside for 27 minutes. When he left at 4:33 a.m., he had a suitcase. It was Rachel's. Police didn't find that out until later, when they showed the footage to Emily. "That's hers," she whispered. No doubt. Inside that suitcase, Rachel had kept all her valuables, her modeling portfolio, spare camera lenses, cash envelopes, and a velvet pouch of heirloom jewelry passed down from her grandmother. The man in the video had stolen all of it. But more than that, the footage confirms something critical. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was someone who had time, who had no fear of being seen, who returned to the scene because he knew no one was looking. And that narrowed the possibilities. It wasn't just someone passing by. It was someone familiar with the building. Maybe someone who had been inside before. Someone who lived nearby. Or worked nearby. Someone who knew when the security guard would be gone. Someone who knew how to disappear into a quiet neighborhood before dawn. Still, there was no name. No identity. Just a face. Just the black hoodie. Just the white sneakers he wore when he left. Police pulled images from surrounding street cameras. A few were blurry. Most were useless. Until they found one frame, just one, from a convenience store 3 blocks away. A man matching the suspect's build used a payphone outside at 11:55 p.m., 25 minutes after Rachel was believed to have died. He made a single call to 911. His voice was male. Calm but hurried. He said, "I think someone's screaming. A foreign girl. Alameda Gardens." Then he hung up. No name. No location. Just enough to raise questions. Why would a killer call 911? To report his own crime? To ease a guilty conscience? Or to send police in the wrong direction? No one knew. But it wasn't the last puzzle he left behind. Because hidden behind the fake name on a job application at a nearby tea shop, there was a real identity. A real hometown. And a trail that would lead detectives hundreds of miles from Portland to a small town in Arkansas where a teenager named Eric Lynn had run from everything, except himself. Sometimes, the most revealing evidence doesn't come from fingerprints or forensics. Sometimes it comes from fear. From guilt. from a shaky voice on the end of a payphone line, whispering something it shouldn't. 11:55 p.m., July 6th. 25 minutes after neighbors heard screams in the stairwell of the Alameda Gardens apartment complex in northeast Portland. 25 minutes after Rachel McAdams likely bled out alone on concrete steps. A call was made to 911 from a public payphone at the corner of Fremont Street and 12th Avenue, roughly 4 blocks from the crime scene. It wasn't long. Just under 30 seconds. A male voice, low and hurried, with a subtle southern accent, said, "I think someone's screaming. A foreign girl. Near Alameda Gardens. You should check." Then he hung up. No name. No apartment number. No building address. No call back. The dispatcher logged it as a possible domestic disturbance and forwarded the alert to patrol units in the area. 2 officers in a cruiser responded within 10 minutes. They circled the neighborhood, quiet streets, darkened windows, a few porch lights still on. They checked nearby buildings, asked 2 night shift security guards if they'd heard anything. Both shook their heads. No screaming. No alarms. Nothing out of place. The call was filed as unfounded. It was nearly 4 a.m. when a different 911 call came in, this time from a young woman named Emily Carter. She had just found what the first caller tried to describe. A body. In the days that followed, that anonymous payphone tip kept bothering investigators. It wasn't unusual to get prank calls on a Sunday night. But this one was different. The tone. The timing. The specificity. Whoever made that call knew too much. Knew it wasn't a gunshot or a firecracker or loud music. Knew it was a foreign girl. Knew the building name. But didn't want to give an address. But because he didn't know? Or because he knew too well? Detectives pulled surveillance footage from traffic cams and businesses near the intersection where the call had been placed. Most feeds weren't helpful, old systems, grainy resolution. But one small convenience store on the corner had a camera aimed directly at the payphone. At 11:55 p.m., a young man walked up to it. Thin. Black hoodie. Light-colored sneakers. He looked both ways before lifting the receiver. He turned his face partially toward the store window, just long enough for the camera to catch the side of his face. The resolution was low. No facial features could be clearly identified. But it matched the man seen in earlier footage outside Rachel's apartment. And more importantly, this confirmed something vital. The killer made the call. This changed the tone of the investigation. It wasn't just a robbery. Not a random act of violence. This was someone who killed, panicked, and tried, maybe even wanted, to call for help, but didn't go through with it. Instead he hid, then returned, then stole everything. That contradiction, the fear and the coldness, the guilt and the greed, told investigators they weren't dealing with a hardened criminal. Not someone calculated, but someone young, someone impulsive, someone afraid, and possibly someone close by. They started with a geographic profile, based on familiarity with Alameda Gardens, knowledge of building access points, timing of return visits, use of a bicycle for silent, fast movement, the specific Anson County drawl in the voice from the payphone. They narrowed it down to 3 surrounding blocks and began canvassing the area. Flyers, interviews, business owners, building maintenance crews, coffee shop baristas, anyone who worked nights. At first, nothing stood out. Until one officer stopped at a small tea shop on Williams Avenue, a place popular with low-wage workers and night shift employees. The manager, a middle-aged Vietnamese man named Mr. Tran, eyed the flyer and blinked. "This one," he said, tapping the grainy security printout. "He worked here. Busboy. Maybe 2 weeks. Then fired." The name on his application was Leo Phone. Age 20. Originally from Anson, Arkansas. No ID presented, only a photocopy of a forged student visa that, when checked, came up blank in U.S. databases. They had a face. They had a false name. But still, no real identity. The breakthrough came from an unpaid parking ticket. 2 months earlier, a bicycle chained illegally to a fire hydrant had received a fine. The bike had no serial number, but the shop that sold it was listed on the citation, East Burnside Cycles. Detectives followed the receipt and found a cash sale to a phone on June 2nd. The store owner remembered the customer. Quiet, nervous, paid in crumpled $20 bills. Said he was staying just up the street at an old hostel. Police pulled records from a former labor hostel now operating unofficially as a boarding house. One room had been abandoned 3 days earlier, left in a rush. Inside were a burned phone, an empty grocery bag from the same market Rachel visited, and a receipt for a one-way Greyhound bus ticket to Little Rock, Arkansas, dated July 7, 11 a.m. The name on the ticket, Eric Lynn. It wasn't a forged name this time. It was real. And it led them south, deep into Anson County, where a quiet farming town would soon be interrupted by the pounding knock of Portland detectives. But first, they needed more than a name. They needed motive. They needed a confession. And in a state-funded internet cafe 3 days later, that's exactly what they would get. In every manhunt, there's a moment when the chase turns personal. When the name on paper becomes a face. When the distant figure in the surveillance video becomes a real person. And in this case, that moment came with 2 simple words. Eric Lynn. Detectives from Portland boarded a flight to Little Rock, Arkansas, then drove 90 minutes northeast into the quiet hills of Anson County, where farmland stretches wide and silence settles thick like morning mist. The GPS led them down a dusty, unmarked road. No streetlights, no signs. Until they reached a rundown internet cafe attached to a roadside motel. It was there, on the 4th day after the murder, that they found him. Sitting alone in the corner, headphones on, eyes locked onto a flickering monitor. A half-finished bottle of soda beside him. A suitcase beneath his chair. Rachel's suitcase. He didn't run. Didn't scream. Didn't even blink. When they said his name, Eric Lynn, he paused the game. Slowly turned his head, looked at them like he'd been expecting this moment for days. The arrest was quiet, uneventful. But what came next was anything but. At the county sheriff's office, seated across from 2 detectives in a small gray room, Eric started talking. No lawyer. No protest. No hesitation. He confessed. In detail. Not just to the murder, but to everything. I didn't mean to kill her, he said. I just didn't know what else to do. Eric Lynn was born in 1990, the only child of a farm laborer and a part-time factory worker. His parents, desperate for better wages, left him behind at age 6 and moved to Memphis for seasonal work. He was raised by his grandmother, a quiet woman who ran a bait shop and believed every problem could be fixed with hot soup and early bedtimes. By 14, Eric had dropped out of school. Not because he was stupid. Because he was invisible. No friends. No guidance. No plans. The internet cafe down the road became his world. Online games gave him something reality never did. Identity, escape, control. At 15 he started drifting. Factory jobs. Warehouses. Poultry plants. Each one lasted a few weeks, maybe a month. He didn't cause trouble. He just didn't care. In May 2008, someone in a gaming forum mentioned seasonal work out west, Portland, Oregon. Eric packed a small duffel, scraped together what little money he had, and boarded a Greyhound bus. He had no real destination, no real plan. He just wanted out. He ended up washing dishes at a tea shop near Alameda Gardens, living in a shared room with 3 other workers. The pay was bad. The hours were worse. But it was enough. Until he got fired, for skipping shifts and falling asleep during deliveries. He didn't argue. Just left. What he didn't have was a way home. No job. No savings. Not even enough for a return bus ticket. That's when the idea started forming. Quietly. Slowly. I wasn't gonna hurt nobody, he told detectives. I just wanted to get in, grab something valuable, and leave. He returned to the apartment building he once delivered tea to, Alameda Gardens. He remembered the layout. He remembered the back stairwell always being quiet. And he remembered a blonde girl who once passed him in the hallway, never locking the door behind her. She smiled at him once. That was all he needed to think she'd be an easy target. On July 6th, around 11 p.m., he walked into the building. No gloves. No mask. Just a black hoodie and an old kitchen knife tucked in his hoodie pocket, just in case. When he reached the 6th floor, the door to Unit 6B was, just as he hoped, slightly open. He pushed it gently. It didn't creak. It didn't resist. Inside, the lights were dim. Rachel was in the living room, facing away from the door, setting a grocery bag down. Then she turned. Saw him. And everything collapsed. She said something I didn't understand, Eric recalled. She took a step toward me. I panicked. He pulled out the knife. Demanded money. Told her to stay still. But she screamed. Not loud. Just sharp. Sudden. Then she ran. To the bedroom. Tried to slam the door. He followed. Kicked it open. I didn't think, he said. I just reacted. He stabbed her once. Then again. And again. Not because she fought. But because he didn't know how to stop. Afterward, the silence was unbearable. He stood over her in the hallway. Her breathing slowing. The blood spreading. He dropped the knife. Wiped his hands on his hoodie. And ran. But guilt, like blood, has a way of clinging to you. An hour later, he was outside the payphone on Fremont Street. He called 911. Tried to help. But couldn't say enough. Didn't say her name. Didn't say the unit number. He hung up. Then watched the street. No police came. So he went back. She was already gone, he whispered. I saw her on the stairs. I knew. But even then he didn't call for help. He went into the apartment. Ransacked it. Took the laptop. Took the camera. Took the suitcase. Took the necklace from the nightstand. Then he left. He hid for 3 days. Mostly in internet cafes. Sleeping on benches. Burning her phone and throwing the SIM card in a drainage ditch. He booked a ticket back to Arkansas under his real name. And waited. Until they found him. When asked if he regretted it, Eric paused. I regret going back. Another pause. I regret everything. But the detectives knew what he truly regretted wasn't the act itself. It was the consequences. And now, those consequences were about to catch up with him. But that story, the trial, the mother's mercy, the judge's question, would come later. There are trials where the courtroom is filled with noise, shouting, outrage, flashbulbs. And then there are trials where the silence says more than words ever could. The trial of Eric Lynn fell into the second category. Because when the details were laid bare, when the photos were shown, when the timeline was read out loud, there was nothing left to say. Only grief. Only pain. And one unexpected act of forgiveness that no one in that room saw coming. It began on a rainy Monday morning in November 2008 at the Multnomah County Courthouse in Portland. The media had already descended on the story weeks earlier. A Canadian model murdered just days before her flight home. A killer who returned to the scene, then vanished into rural America. A payphone confession no one could act on. But what truly drew the cameras was her mother, Linda McAdams. She wasn't a public speaker. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted answers. The courtroom was small, wooden benches, fluorescent lights, the faint hum of a broken ceiling fan. Eric Lynn sat quietly between his public defenders. No shackles. No tears. Just a blank stare fixed on the floor. He didn't look at Linda. He didn't look at anyone. Not even when the charges were read out loud. 1 count of aggravated murder with intent. 1 count of robbery in the first degree. 1 count of unlawful entry and criminal concealment. He didn't flinch. The prosecution laid out the case with chilling precision. Rachel McAdams had entered the U.S. legally, working under a short-term modeling contract. She was days away from returning home. On the night of July 6th, Eric Lynn entered her unlocked apartment with the intent to rob. When discovered, he panicked, pulled a knife, and stabbed her 22 times. After the attack, he fled, returned hours later, and stole her valuables. He made a phone call to 911 but withheld vital information. He then fled the state and attempted to disappear. They played the surveillance footage. The courtroom watched, silent, as the screen showed the grainy figure circling the building on his bicycle at 3:57 a.m. Watched as he entered with a backpack. Watched as he left with Rachel's suitcase. A time-stamped record of guilt. Then came the autopsy report. Graphic. Clinical. Devastating. It confirmed what many already knew but hadn't yet processed. Rachel had fought back. She had tried to live. Her arms were covered in defensive wounds. Her hands sliced through from trying to grab the blade. And still, she made it to the stairwell. So she tried to crawl. By the end, no one in the room could make eye contact. Not even the judge. Then the defense stood. They didn't deny the facts. They couldn't. But they tried to add context. They spoke of Eric's background: poverty, abandonment, lack of education. They spoke of his mental immaturity, his lack of intent to kill when he first entered the apartment. They pointed to the 911 call, saying it showed remorse. They said he was just a scared teenager, not a cold-blooded killer. But the prosecution wasn't moved. He didn't run away in panic, the lead prosecutor said. He came back. He stole. He watched her die, then took her laptop. Then came the question that would decide everything. Should Eric Lynn be sentenced to death, life in prison, or receive a reduced sentence due to age and remorse? Under Oregon law, the judge had discretion, but so did the victim's family. And so, the court turned to Linda McAdams. She stood up slowly, a woman in her mid-50s, face aged not by time, but by grief. Her hands shook as she adjusted the microphone. "I came here today not to demand punishment," she began, voice steady. "I came here to understand why." She paused, looking at Eric for the first time. He looked up, only for a second. "You took my daughter's life. You stabbed her again and left her to die. You stole from her. And then you vanished. But I saw your family too. They sat behind you. I saw your mother, confused, helpless, crying into a tissue because she couldn't even speak English. I saw your father, silent, staring at his hands. And I realized you didn't just destroy our family. You destroyed your own." The courtroom was dead silent. "I don't believe in the death penalty," she said. "I never have. Because death ends everything. And I want you to live with what you've done. So I ask the court to spare your life. Not because you deserve it, but because my daughter would not want more death to come from this. Let this end here." The judge looked stunned. Even the prosecution paused. Eric? He didn't cry. But his shoulders collapsed inward, like the final bit of weight had settled on them. A few days later, the sentence was delivered. "Eric Lynn, for the crimes committed, this court sentences you to death. Suspended for a period of 2 years. If no further crimes are committed during this time, your sentence will be automatically converted to life imprisonment without parole." A suspended death sentence. Not mercy. Not absolution. But a pause. A warning. A final chance to carry the weight of what he'd done. The story hit national news. Some called it justice. Others called it weakness. But those inside the courtroom that day, those who heard Linda's voice, who felt the way her words cracked through stone walls, knew something deeper had happened. Something that had nothing to do with law. And everything to do with humanity. One final part remained. The journey back home. The quiet funeral. The flowers. And a final letter placed inside Rachel's casket, sealed, unread, addressed to someone who would never receive it. There are goodbyes we prepare for. Airports. Graduation caps. Away from a car window. And then there are goodbyes that never happen. Because someone took the chance away. Because one final moment was stolen. For Linda McAdams, that moment came in a quiet room lined with flowers, thousands of miles from home. It was a Tuesday afternoon at a funeral home near downtown Portland. There were no TV cameras. No reporters. Just a small circle of people, embassy staff, church volunteers, and 2 friends who had only known Rachel for 12 days, but would remember her for life. Her body had been prepared with care. The bruises were covered. The wounds hidden beneath soft fabric. She wore a simple white dress, one her mother had chosen from photos of their last vacation together. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't for a runway. But it was the kind of dress Rachel would have worn to sit barefoot on the grass with a book and a bag of grapes. Beside her, in the casket, lay a sealed envelope. It wasn't long. Just a handwritten note from Linda. No one read it but her. But according to a funeral director, she'd rewritten it 3 times. Crumpling one version. Crying through another. What she finally placed with her daughter simply said, "I forgive him, but I will never understand why. And I hope you didn't feel alone." When it was time to close the casket, Linda didn't cry. She just stood there for a long moment and whispered, "You were supposed to come home." The plane carrying Rachel's remains left Portland 3 days later, escorted by Canadian consular staff. When it arrived in Vancouver, hundreds attended her memorial service, many who had never met her. Photographers from her high school, students from her old ballet class, a few models who had also taken jobs abroad, now shaken by what her story represented. And at the very back of the church sat a quiet couple, Eric Lynn's parents. They didn't speak to anyone. They didn't wear labels. But Linda knew who they were. And she nodded once, silently, from across the room. Rachel's story was over. But its shadow stretched far beyond those 7 days in Portland. A few months later, a national journalist released an in-depth exposé titled "The Unseen Price of the Modeling Dream." It highlighted the unregulated world of international modeling contracts, the misleading promises, and the young girls, some underage, shuffled between cities with little protection. Rachel's name was mentioned. So was Emily Carter, who had since returned to British Columbia and stopped modeling altogether. "I still wake up thinking she'll be in the kitchen," Emily wrote in a short blog post. "I still check the lock twice every night." As for Eric Lynn, he was transferred to a maximum security correctional facility in Eastern Oregon. He kept to himself, read books, rarely spoke. Every year on July 6th, prison staff noticed he skipped meals. Not for religious reasons, just silence. He never appealed the sentence, never asked for visitors. And in a rare interview 5 years later, when asked what he would say to Linda if she ever let him write a letter, he said, "I wouldn't ask for forgiveness. She already gave that. I just say, I know what I took. And I live with it every single day." In 2016, the suspended death sentence was officially converted to life imprisonment without parole. The judge wrote in the final order, "The defendant has shown compliance with all terms of confinement, but the weight of his crime will never be lifted. He will die in custody. That is justice enough." Back in Canada, Linda McAdams became an unexpected voice in victim advocacy. Not a politician, not a lawyer, just a mother. She spoke at universities, sometimes trembling, sometimes steady, always honest. "Forgiveness is not a gift to the person who hurt you," she said once. "It's a decision to live without hate, to move forward, and to remember your child not for how they died, but how they lived." In her home office, she kept a framed photo of Rachel at 16. Sunlight across her face. No makeup, just wind, freckles, and laughter. On the back of the frame, in pencil, she had written, "She was light. She was going to be so many things." And for a while, she really believed the world was good. She wasn't wrong. It's just that someone forgot that, for a moment. And in that moment, everything changed. Candle Rachel McAdams. 1986 to 2008. "You were supposed to come home."